Hello again and welcome to another CPD talk. My name's Jasmine. I'm one of the seniors in blood transfusion at Medway and I'd like to welcome you to another quarterly transfusion update. So I know it's been a while since the last one. I apologise for that. As I said before, we were hoping to have them quarterly, but it looks like they may be more biannual, but we will see what happens. So what are we going to cover today? This time we still have 2 case studies. We only have 1 CAPA to go through, and we do have a positive learning. I just apparently haven't put it in the contents page, so my apologies for that. We'll get to that later. So we're going to start off with the first case study, which begins with a sickle cell patient who came into the hospital. So we had never seen this patient before, and as per our protocol, we needed to send them away for extended phenotyping. The BMS sent this sample away, and when we received the report back, it actually turned out that they had been tested by a different hospital. So we didn't actually have an extended phenotype, they had been genotyped instead. So the NHSBT very kindly let us have access to this report. As you can see, this is Apex, our limb system, and this is us putting in the report that we were sent through. Yes, you can see the comments on here saying that the genotype was previously performed and that this is a copy of that report, so it's not from the sample that we sent them. Now, for the most part, this is quite standard and nothing special going on until we get to later on, where you see that this patient has an FY-GATA mutation. So what does that mean? The GATA mutation is one that occurs as a result of a GATA promoter region mutating upstream from the FY allele. The mutation prevents the expression of the Duffy glycoprotein on erythrocytes. So in this case, if we go back and have a look at the genotyping, the patient was actually positive for FYB. However, because there is a mutation upstream of the allele, it means that this is not going to be expressed on the red blood cells, and therefore their phenotype is FYA negative, FYB negative. This mutation is most commonly found in the black population and does not prevent expression of the FY antigen on other cells, only on red blood cells, and is one of the reason that I've chosen to go through this case study is because it's quite a good example of how the phenotype is only an estimate of our genetics. So if we had just performed a phenotype, it would have indicated the FYB being negative. Even though technically the genotype is positive, there's just that mutation that's stopping it from being expressed. This sort of ties into a presentation that was done recently on phenotyping. Again, it only very briefly touched on genotyping, but it's just important to know that there can be a difference between what is coded for and what's expressed on the patient's red blood cells. So we're going to move on to the second case study. That was a very quick one, I know. So this is one where in the lab there was a sample that was received, and on the form the only clinical detail present was theatre. When the patient was looked up on our limb system, it showed that they had an anti-KNA/MCA. This was brought to the BMS's attention, who wasn't aware of this antibody, so came and discussed it with a senior member of staff. The senior also wasn't necessarily aware of this antibody, but had a look through the blood grouping antigens fact book and came to the reasoning that it probably had a error when being entered, and actually this patient, it was anti-KNA/MCCA. So when you're looking at the way that this is denoted, it's actually saying that there are 2 antibodies there. So you've got an anti-KNA and an anti-MCCA. So they're not the same antibody, they're 2 different ones. However, they are denoted in that way because they are often associated. So it's just a nice way to say that normally they are linked. So both of these antibodies are antibodies to high incidence antigens. Neither are routinely clinically significant. However, the patient also had an allo anti-little c. So what is a high incidence antigen? Now we're just going to go through this very quickly. There is meant to be a talk at some point on high incidence and low incidence antigens, but high incidence antigens are ones that over 99% of the population have on their red blood cells. Therefore, if a patient has an antibody to one of these, it's highly unlikely that you will have blood in your stock fridge that would be compatible, because it's all going to have that antigen present on it. And not only that, but the reagent red cells that we use will probably also have the antigens on them. So you're going to end up with pan-reactive results. This then obviously makes it very, very difficult when you're doing your testing, because although we mentioned that it's not this then makes it very, very difficult for your testing, because although we mentioned that it's not normally clinically significant, it's going to obscure your panel. So you're not going to be able to tell whether there are new clinically significant antibodies present. Not only that, but all of the full cross matches you do will come up looking incompatible, because again, the patient will probably have those red cells antigens present. So having looked at this, what happened was an antibody panel was put on at the same time as the patient's blood group, and the BMSs attempted to get through to the ward. Unfortunately, the doctor who was looking after the patient wasn't around, so we were told we'd be phoned back. So the antibody panel came back, and as you can see, it is pan-reactive in IAT, but it's negative in enzyme. So the anti-KNA, which is anti-NOPS, it's from the NOPS section, and the MCCA is McIlroy. Neither of those antibodies react in enzyme, so they're both destroyed in enzyme. However, this patient also has the anti-little c. So having a look at this, you can probably make that guess or that informed decision that the patient's anti-little c is not currently circulating. However, this still means that any of the other antibodies that are destroyed in enzymes, so from the MNS system or the Duffy system, etc., could still be there and being masked by these two antibodies. We managed to get back in contact with the clinician who was dealing with the patient, and the patient was actually going to theatre in the next hour for an open reduction and internal fixation of the legs. So we explained the situation to the clinician and the risk that the blood that we issue for the patient could cause a transfusion reaction. The surgeon then decided that due to the starting haemoglobin and that the patient was a lower risk of massive bleeding, that he wanted to proceed with the surgery. Now obviously this is not the ideal situation, but it is at the end of the day the surgeon's decision. So when you have a situation like this, it's very important to cover all of your bases. So what we did is we made sure that the transfusion practitioner and the haematology consultant were informed of what was going on. So if there was any bleeding and they had to get involved later, they knew. And then we cross-matched the units that we could find that would be suitable for this patient in our fridge in an attempt to get some form of blood ready should the patient bleed. So when we set up this selection of units, obviously we did RH matched, and we ended up choosing the two most suitable, so the ones with the weakest reactions, to be issued to the patient. We kept these to one side though, so if they did come and get it, we could make sure they were aware of the implications of having the units. Whilst doing this, we also made sure that we got a sample to send away, the NHSBT, so that we could get compatible blood. This is obviously not probably going to happen during the surgery. However, it's still important to send it away because the patient could end up having post-operative bleeding and need blood at a later date. Thankfully though, orthopedics have a lot of technology that's available to them to help reduce and prevent bleeding, as well as to help deal with the bleeding when it occurs. So they've got things like cell salvage, they'll use tranexamic acid. There's just a lot out there that orthopedics can use to prevent bleeding. So in this case, the patient did not need any of the blood. When we got the report back from NHSBT, so you can see that pretty much all of our estimations were correct. The anti-little c was not present, as indicated from the negative enzyme panel, and there weren't any other red cell antibodies there apart from the anti-KNA and the anti-MCCA. So you can see as well that this report confirms that there was a typo on the patient's record, which meant that we could go back and alter it to be the correct information. So the point of going through this case study was, firstly, it's quite interesting when you have got those patients who have antibodies to high incidence antigens, but also to bring home about making sure when you're booking in patient information, having a look at what the details are, referring that to a BMS. If you are the BMS, looking into the antibodies that the patient have if you have not heard of it before, and just following through to be on the safe side. It allowed us to prepare a lot better for the worst scenario than it would have done if we weren't aware of what was going on. So we're now going to move on to CAPAs, although today we are going to only be going through one. So this one that we're going through is about people not filling out information about reagents when they are put in use. So this is happening a lot at the moment, and I just wanted to spend the time to make sure people are aware of why it's important that we are filling out these slips. So if you are putting a reagent into use when it's not been used before, it's really important that there is some documentation of that. I know at different trusts they do different things, so I know that at Dartford you have a diary that you put it in, whereas at Medway we use a form. Either way, it's really important to document that information, because if we do have a recall of a reagent that could have been giving us inaccurate results, we're not going to know which patients would have been affected by that if we don't know when the batch was put into use. Obviously we can make a guesstimate, but it's not going to be as accurate as it would be if we had the date. Not only that, but if later on it comes to a court case where it has led to some issues with the patient, if we don't have that evidence to say, oh, this is when it was put into use, this is what we did about it, then how can we prove that we have made sure that the sample has been tested effectively? So it's just important that if you are putting a reagent into use, you try and find, or you ensure that you are recording that according to your protocol. We're now going to move on to what we're doing well. And I want to start this off by saying that everyone has worked really hard over the last year. I know it's been a very difficult year for a lot of people and just very stressful in general. So I just wanted to make sure that we addressed that. So I want to have a look at a particular case, and it's about thinking ahead and how this can help everyone. So what we're looking at is we had a patient who had been bleeding intermittently for over a week. They first started this bleeding when she had a massive blood loss, which made its way to stage 2, or a major hemorrhage, which meant that she required platelets. Now, she was a woman of childbearing age, and on this site we only keep A positive units, which meant that we had to give prophylactic anti-D to allow her to have those units, which was completely fine at the time, but obviously she's still bleeding and she's been given prophylactic anti-D, which means that she is now a serological cross-match every time she needs more blood. So throughout the coming weeks, the whole team have worked really well in ensuring that there is not only blood in stock, but that it's cross-matched and ready for when the patient requires more. They've also been great at ensuring that there are other products in stock for when she needs them, so ordering in platelets that are negative and can be given to her with relative ease. So by working together like that, it means that there's less pressure on the next shift if she does suddenly need blood, and then they can cross-match more when there's not as much going on in the lab. So I just wanted to address that this is obviously a great way of practicing, and I think everyone really appreciates it when they come in and that's sorted and they don't need to worry about it. And not only that, obviously it reduces the delay to the patient getting the blood. it helps get it out faster. So it's not only good for the patient, but it's also good for the team. So that's about it this time. It's not as long as the last one, probably, thankfully. But thank you all so much for this. I did get one of the case studies was sent to me by someone, so thank you for that as well. And if you do come across any interesting cases or areas where you think people have worked really well, then please do let me know. You can send me an email, or you can let one of the other BT seniors know. And I look forward to next time. So thank you very much for watching. See you later. Bye.